Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Today is day 5 of Admissions and Occupancy with Cheryl A. Cosley. My name is Alyssa Atkins, and I am the Training and Development Coordinator for the Native Learning Center, and today I will be your webinar facilitator. Just a quick disclaimer before we get started. This webinar provides a summary of fundamental concepts, requirements, and/or procedures within the allotted 90 minutes. The material discussed does not illustrate all possible scenarios that could be applicable. Also displayed here is our copyright infringement law. This is just a friendly reminder that the webinar presentation materials are protected by copyright, trademark, trade secret, and other intellectual property laws. So before we get started, I'm just going to show you how you can interact in today's webinar. If you look at the top of your screen, you will see a hand. With that hand, you can raise hand, agree, disagree, applaud, laugh, or step away. Now your screen should look similar to this graphic here. To the bottom left, you will see a pod that says Files. Here you will find any handouts or appendix items included in today's presentation. Please feel free to download a copy for yourself. Just hover over the item you want to download with your mouse, then click the arrow pointing downwards to download and save onto your device. Once the item is downloaded, it should appear in your device's download section. The second pod to the right, labeled Web Links, is where you will find our survey about today's webinar, along with a link to receive our weekly newsletter, connect with the Native Learning Center on LinkedIn, and any other links that will be seen throughout today's presentation. Finally, to the right of the screen, we have a chat pod available. This is how you will communicate with instructor and NLC staff. If you have any questions during the presentation, we welcome you to send them in by using the chat box. Simply type your message into the space that says type here and hit enter or click that up arrow icon button to submit. We do encourage class participation, so please feel free to write in those questions or comments. Tech support issues should also be submitted here. Know that most can be solved by leaving and rejoining the meeting room. Let's all get the chat box going together now by typing in your name, where you're joining us from, your tribal affiliation, and your work or role in Indian country. And I see we already have some people letting us know in the chat box, so thank you very much. It is now with a pleasure that I hand it off to Cheryl.
Thank you very, very much, my girl. Welcome to day 5. We'll see how close to 3 o'clock we can make it today. A lot of information again. I do hope you have enjoyed this week's course. So welcome and good afternoon. I just got done smudging. That's how we start a lot of our meetings and our trainings in Indian country. Again, this presentation is courtesy of the Native Learning Center. My information's at the beginning and the end if you ever need anything. More about me again. If you've been here all week, you know it all. My name is Cheryl Cosley. My Anishinaabe name is Redbird Woman. I am Loon Clan. I come from the place of the Pike, Bay Mills Indian Reservation. We're located at the top of Michigan, and our waters actually border Canada. We're a Ojibwe Chippewa people, and I served as Director of Housing for over 28 years for my tribe. I was honored during that time to work with the National American Indian Housing Council. I started out as the secretary on the board of directors and then went to the vice chair. Did that for 12 years, and then I became the chairperson for two-year terms. I also served with the Great Lakes Indian Housing Association, which is the 31 tribes around the Great Lakes, and served as their chairwoman for 7 years. And I have been providing training and technical assistance for the last 5 years. So I work with tribes throughout the 28 years. I was all the way, around the country. And then in the last 5, I've continued to do so. I train a lot on the road all over. I'll be in Maine next week, California the week after that. I go from one area to the other, and I've got a pretty busy schedule, but I like to help. I've been blessed to be able to continue to help our people. So our objectives, again, we're going to get into the collections portion, I believe, today. We're going to continue to learn all of the different components of occupancy, as we've been doing all day today. You know the structure. Please Be prompt when we run our questions, because I try to wait for a certain amount of students, and if you guys can get in there quicker, we can get out quicker. And it's Friday, so pull down these examples, these reference materials. They are a huge help. Okay. So, occupancy standards, other programs, lease management, lease compliance, counseling, and collections, we are going to hit on today. So, occupancy standards is our module for the day, the one we're going to start out with. This is how far this is taken from the shore of where I live at, and that is Canada, the land you see in the back. We have 1,000 footers that go up and down the river here. And sometimes you can see as many as 3 or 4 as they get ready to go down through the Soo locks. So, minimum occupancy standards, okay? Does your applicant, first of all, meet the definition of family? Well, NAHASDA's definition of family even includes a single person. So, they should, it depends on if you have any conditions within your policies. Does your family's income fall within those prescribed limits? Are they under 80% of median income? Do they fall between 80 and 100? And does your IHP allow you that 10% authority? Is the applicant a suitable customer and able to meet the requirements of the program? You really need to look at, are you going to allow people that have been evicted back in your program? Your A&O policy needs to address that. Are you going to allow people that owe the housing entity money? Are you going to take their application? We wouldn't. We wouldn't even take that application until it was paid in full. That's something that you can put in your A&O policy. Were they bad? Did they trash your house, but maybe pay up? Well, then maybe you're going to look at, okay, if we do give you a second chance, we're going to put an addendum on your lease. We're going to give you more frequent inspections, and we're going to double your security deposit. You can do things like that. Always involve your legal department when you're doing, addendums and things like that. But you can do that, because you might get tribal direction to make sure that you service them again. You guys understand what I mean by that. So, other occupancy standards, family characteristics, unit sizes, elderly, are they 62 years of age or older? Are they near elderly, 55 to 62? Make sure that your A&O policy addresses what you allow, what provisions, at what age the deductions kick in. Persons with disabilities, single persons. So your unit size is one of the most difficult aspects of selecting your families for housing. You have to determine the appropriate size of that housing unit. Because of the number of the family members is going to increase and decrease over time. A dwelling unit appropriate today might not be a year from now. Okay. It may be necessary to anticipate the size of the family to avoid having to move them into a larger or a smaller home in the future. If their lease period, if your family sizes change and they're overhoused for the size of the family, if it's a rental, you might need to ask them to move because you've got families on your waiting list that require that size home. Your 4 and 5 bedrooms are a prime example for that in most places. So you make sure that your A&O policy addresses that. And if they're in a rental, you make sure the conversations you have when you put them in there, that you tell them in the future, should you outgrow this home, we might ask you to move to a smaller rental. It's never appropriate to place a family in an overcrowded situation in anticipation of the family size decreasing in the future. We had a lot of mutual help units here. We also ran a lot of different mortgages, USDA, 184, and conventional mortgages. What we also would do is we would have our families that were in the mutual help homes, they would convey, and there'd be a mom and a dad, maybe one kid, sometimes not even one, left in that unit. They could come back to the housing authority and we would purchase that home back. We would purchase that home back cheaper than we could probably rebuild one from scratch. And that would also help our tribal members, and we try to find them or give them the means to build a smaller unit. That's one thing that we would do for our tribal members, and it helped us also as an organization. So there are no set requirements to determine unit size. Your policy should consider the number of the people in the household, the children expected to be born, adopted, taken into custody. You can take that into consideration if they're foster parents and they often bring in, children, live in attendance, children who are away at school, but come home during certain times of the year. Bedroom needs based on health or medical reasons, possible growth potential in the family, especially within, your home ownership program. So occupancy review, the purpose of the occupancy review is to ensure the recipient complies with the requirements of the Section 203 and 207 of NAHASDA and its own policies and procedures. Your reviewer is going to determine if the participating families were low income, first of all, at the time they entered into the program. They will also determine proof of, do the files have supporting documentation verifying that income? Do the files have supporting documentation verifying income prior to providing any type of emergency assistance? Does the tribe or your TDHE admissions and occupancy policy state the families can continue to participate in the program if they subsequently become low income? So we had that discussion, I think probably the first day. Your A&O policies need to address that. If your families are low income when they come in, are you going to let them continue to stay in your low rent programs? And then are you going to charge them more? So remember, your governing body needs to make that decision and you have to be consistent. You can't say, no, well, you guys can all stay, but you need to pay more and you can stay at the rate you're at. You have to be consistent. It's got to be for everybody. It's got to be addressed in your policy. And then when they go to review your files, that's what they're going to look for. So, if participating families are not low income, do the files contain the documentation that verify the tribe has determined there's a need for housing for those families who cannot reasonably be met without that assistance or your tribal assistance? Has the tribe or TDHE used less than 10% of its annual grant amount to assist families with incomes that fall between 80 and 100%? And does that IHP give that 10% authority? If the tribe and the TDHE used more than 10% of its annual grant amount for families with the incomes between 80 and 100%, did they obtain prior HUD approval? So remember, you got to track that authority. And if you get close and the next family brings you over your 10%, you have to call HUD and ask, say, hey, I got one more family here I'd like to assist. If I'm going to run like $2,000 over. And you get it. And whenever you're seeking permission from anything from HUD, get that permission in writing. Ask them if they can put it in an email or a letter, and you print it and you put it in that file. One of the reasons put it in the tenant file and then put it in the tracking file. One of the reasons you're doing that is they might come and audit that file 5 years down the road, and that HUD person might not be there, okay? If the tribe or the TDHE assisted families whose income are over 100% of median income, did it obtain that prior HUD approval? So other eligible families, they're going to look to see if it contained, if the participants is a law enforcement officer and you helped them under the provision for law enforcement in the NAHASDA statute. If the participant is employed full-time as a law enforcement officer, are they sworn to uphold the law and make arrest? Remember, they can't be a dog catcher. They have to have the ability to make an arrest. Has the tribe or TDHE determined, and you have to say, we have determined that the presence of this officer will deter crime, okay? Have they determined that the law enforcement officer's presence may deter crime? So when you see these at the end of these modules, what I'm doing is showing you exactly what HUD's going to check for, okay? So review the participant selection practices. So they're going to review recent selections to ensure that they are in accordance with your selection procedures. They are going to review the minutes from the Board of Commissioners, from their meetings, or the tribal council, whoever govern you, to ensure compliance with your selection policies and procedures. And then they're going to determine if that Native American status is verified. I've seen findings out in Indian country for housing non-Native Americans as the only occupant. Okay, you got to have a Native in there somewhere. So review the participant selection practices unless they are essential or law enforcement. Okay, there's wiggle room there. So you review your participant selection practices, review the requirements regarding the conflicts of interest, okay, to determine if the recipient has included conflict of interest provisions in their policy. They're going to look for that. If they are notifying HUD, if a person who participates in that decision-making process, who gains inside information with regards to NAHASDA, is provided housing-related services, of the nature of the assistance to be provided and the basis for selection of that person, just in case they're related to one of your decision makers or your staff. And if you're making that public disclosure, if you're putting that statement up that I showed you yesterday. So home ownership and rental program from a sampling. So they sample up to 10% of your files, or 10%. It's 10 files up to 10%. Okay. So they'll be pulling these files. Review the home buyer and rent payments to determine if the practices comply with the tribe or the TDHE's policies, NAHASDA regulations for computing payments and establishing rent. Review income eligibility verifications to determine if the tenant or the home buyer is income eligible at the time they entered into the program. If research are performed, if required, okay, you should always be recertifying. Why? Just to prove that you're not charging them over 30%. They need to make that verification. Third-party verification is obtained, okay? Practices are consistent with the recipient's policies. If that tenant is income eligible at the time they entered into your program, okay? So they're going to look at all of that. Regulations for computing your payments, establishing your rents. They're going to look to see if you've told them what method you're going to use that. Review the lease and the home ownership agreements to determine if they comply with the block grant regulations. You don't have any, to make sure that they don't contain any unreasonable terms and conditions. Did they require the recipient to maintain housing in compliance with the applicable housing codes and quality standards? Do they require the recipient to give the period of time established by tribal or local law for written notice of termination? Remember, I told you about that. Look at your A&O policy. Calendar days, business days. It's got to say how long until we give you notice. What's reasonable? As I said, 10 business days sounds reasonable to me, so do they state that the resident has the opportunity to examine any relevant documents, records, regulations directly related to their eviction or termination prior to any hearing or trial? Okay, you have to give them that right. Do they note that the recipient may not terminate the tenancy during the term of the lease except for serious or repeated violations of the terms or conditions of the lease? Except for, you know, you got violations of federal law, state law, tribal law, local law, or any other good cause. Do they provide the recipient, or do they provide for you as a recipient to terminate the tenancy of a resident for any activity the resident, a member of the household, or any guest? Remember, I told you, make sure they understand about the conduct of their guest, can get them evicted, okay? Or any other person under control of the resident may be engaged in that threatens the health, safety, or right to peaceful enjoyment, okay? That particular statement is the grounds for a lot of evictions. Just right there. Threatens the health, safety, or right to peaceful enjoyment of, okay, of the premises by other residents or your recipient's employees. So your employees are covered under this net. Threatens the health, safety, or right to peaceful enjoyment of the premises by persons residing in the immediate vicinity of those premises. Includes criminal activity, including drug-related activity on or off the premises. So your tenant account receivables, you hear them referred to as TARs. You should identify your current dollar amount and percentage of total TARs because they're going to look at them. So your TARs percentage equals the total TARs divided into your total tenant revenue due, including rent and other charges. And those TARs, high TARs, are not a violation of the statute or the regulation. So therefore, they cannot issue you, when they're doing that monitoring, a finding in that monitoring area. But high TARs would be what they call a concern. So when they give you your statement, all of your things that you need to correct, should there be any, you have violations which you must address, and you have concerns which you should address. You usually address them all. So you're still going to have to deal with these. There should be no such thing as free rent or lack of collection. That's one area. Collections are really, really a huge component of your program. Okay. So this is a rating scale. Is your TARS percentage poor or very poor? If yes, they would find that a concern. 0 to 9% is considered good, okay, or very good. 10 to 24% is fair. 25 to 49 is poor. If you're only collecting half the money that you should be out there, that's poor, okay? 50% and higher is very poor. If you have a good collections policy, you follow it. It doesn't matter who it is, you follow that policy. And then you won't have the collections like that, or the TARs. Is the recipient abiding by its occupancy policy when it comes to rent collection or repayment plans, eviction for non-payment of rent? Does the recipient initiate any type of counseling when a tenant begins to lag in those rental payments? So down payment assistance, they're going to look at that program if you offer it. If the recipient has a down payment assistance program, do they have policies that address the requirements for this type of assistance? Does the recipient have an application process and select recipients from a waiting list? Okay. It's very important that you just don't serve whoever, you know. The other part of this should be if they fall between 80 and 100%, have they done the calculations on are those recipients receiving the correct amount of assistance? Remember when we did that? 10,000 is what they give out. In that scenario was 8,500. Making sure that, you don't have slippage in that area. Determine whether the recipients are eligible low-income Native American families. Did the recipient determine whether the homes being purchased was within the TDC? And the TDC is a total development cost. You can go into Code Talk, go into the program guidances or the PIH notices. The last one was published, if it's not in your reference materials, in 2022, and it'll tell you what your total development costs are. Okay, it doesn't, it excludes certain things, and it gives you for your area. You can go in there and see your specific housing entity, how much your total development cost and what is counted and what isn't. And when you build, and it doesn't matter if the tribe kicks in money, you have to stay within that total development cost to be deemed moderate housing and NAHASDA eligible. Okay. Is there documentation to demonstrate that there are no lead-based paint issues? Okay. If it's a brand new house, there's no doubt, there is no lead-based paint. But because it's down payment assistance, it could be an older house that they are actually getting. So you have to make sure you have somebody looking at that lead-based paint. Is there a binding agreement to ensure that the home remains affordable for a period of time? A lien on the property is also appropriate. And we're going to get into talking about that later on today. Okay, so your exercises. You ready, lady? NAHASDA determines unit sizes for family. True or false? Quicker you answer, the quicker we can get done, guys. Couple more. Come on. Got a 50-50 shot at it. A couple of more you guys can answer. Okay. Getting ready to close it. Come on, one more. One more, you weigh in. Okay. And the answer is false. NAHASDA does not determine the size for families. You must make that determination. Okay. Other programs and A&O requirements. So your other program criteria, so your admissions and occupancy policies apply to your housing programs in general. A lot of recipients have created additional programs which generate unique requirements. Okay, remember that's why I told you first and the second day you should have your separate, everything should be separate applications, separate rules and regulations. Down payment and closing cost assistance, tenant-based rental assistance, TBRA, housing rehab assistance, homeowner loan improvement assistance, mold remediation assistance, weatherization, emergency assistance. These are some of the other programs that you see offered throughout Indian country. Down payment and closing cost criteria. Establish your policies governing the eligibility of participants and the delivery of the assistance. Program design considers the following factors: the amount of assistance. How much are you going to give out? Is it going to be a deferred loan? Are you following the useful life requirements? Are you going to look for any type of credit qualification, mortgage qualification, grant assistance or a loan? Availability of existing housing, and new construction in your area. Is there any to even offer that program? Some people have found there's not, not for down payment unless they are, rebuilding or building. And your affordability ratios. Lease purchase criteria. Rental with an exclusive option to purchase. Establish option period based on when the applicant can achieve that mortgage readiness. Requires more in-depth analysis of income and education than those required for a rental. May require a pre-qualification waiting period to ensure that that applicant is committed to becoming mortgage ready. You can't be late when you have a mortgage out there. Your selection process is definitely more rigorous than your selection for rental participants. So rehab program criteria. There's numerous possibilities. It depends on how you design your program. If you're doing that, Google it. Go to your conventions, go to your housing association meetings, find out from your peers. A lot of people already have this, Native American housing or Indian housing rehab program. See what comes up, start looking at whatever, you don't need to reinvent that wheel all the time. So numerous possibilities: owner occupied, emergency, modernization, essential major repairs. There's insurance requirements that you have to make sure that somebody in the A&O department is paying attention to when you give out this type of money. Useful life for homeowner occupied. Maintenance counseling. Is it going to be a loan? Is it going to be a grant? Are you going to have priorities, perhaps for your seniors? Oldest homes first, or maybe greatest need due to the threat of health and safety. Those are all decisions, that you can put in there and factor in. So these are samples, okay? Step 1, eligibility, income, consent to release of information, verifications, and ownership status. Also remember, always remember, we are not allowed to pay taxes with NAHASDA funds, okay? So you can't, under any circumstances, pay taxes for one of your tenants because they're late. You have to have a payment in lieu of taxes if you're building off of a reservation. You have to negotiate that with your city or township so they provide those major services: fire, safety, ambulance, water. And HUD will make sure that you have those in place. They call that a pilot, payment in lieu of taxes. Ownership status. Got to define that scope of work, that SAL. Inspect the property, prepare the scope of work, make sure the environmentals. We have to do environmentals before we spend any money. Department of Labor. If it's over $2,000 and it's not your staff doing it, Davis-Bacon kicks in. Cost analysis, procurement. We have very, stringent procurement, budgeting. And as I said, the insurance requirements. I think the insurance requirements are in your reference materials. Execute the agreement, meet with the applicant, review the documents, execute a useful life binding commitment, commence the work, inspect the work, make payment, final inspection and payment, because In construction, you always need to keep adequate retainage to make sure your contractor will come back and complete his punch list. If you don't keep enough, you won't see them. They'll move on to bigger and better, and you'll have an undone punch list, okay? You got to keep enough there. Certificate of occupancy. And that final process is record a lien if there is one. Home repair agreement, another important document that you might wish to use as a home repair agreement. There's a sample found within your reference materials. Your agreement should include provisions that comply with NAHASDA's useful life and insurance requirements. These documents are also within your reference materials. Weatherization. This is another program that you often see in Indian country that falls under A&O. Weatherization programs have similar considerations as do housing rehab, but additional questions need to be asked to determine the extent of the assistance that is required, such as, is it a primary or a secondary heating source? What types of appliances do you have? How old are they? Do you have any structural deficiencies? You need to get consent forms for utility usage data, weatherization and education requirements, property value information, property standards requirements, warranty information, useful life and insurance requirements, and again, always pay attention to those income restrictions. So your lead-based paint, if IHBG funds are used for rehab, acquisition, tenant-based rental assistance, or a provision of assistance to households to acquire housing, you have to make sure that you're adhering to, or someone within your organization is in charge of lead-based paint. Down payment and homeowner rehab, and the housing to be acquired or occupied, if it was built before January 1st of 1978, it could contain lead. Your tribe or TDHE has to follow the regulations on lead-based paint 24 CFR 35. This is something that somebody within your maintenance staff, your building staff, or your A&O should be in charge of, is lead-based paint. They used to require the executive directors to go take schooling on it and pass a series of tests. Long time ago. I remember mine was held within a Hilton in the Dallas-Fort Worth airport, so I was a week in an airport. We used to ride around the train to go get our meals and then have to test out to prove that we knew enough about lead-based paint. And that was a non-native agency doing all of that testing. But we have to adhere to the lead-based paint requirements. Your insurance program, okay, so I did hit on it. The intent of the guidance, and it goes back to 2014-03, this is the name of the guidance. The intent of the guidance is to provide block grant recipients with direction on when insurance is required, what insurance requirements apply, when insurance is considered adequate, what insurance requirements apply to contractors and subcontractors, and what other insurance requirements under NAHASDA. What are other, okay? When is insurance required and in what amount? Insurance coverage is required for housing units owned, operated, or assisted with block grant funds. Adequate insurance is insurance in an amount that's going to protect the financial stability of you as the recipient and your IHBG program. This means the recipient's housing units and privately owned housing units that are assisted with block grant funds must be adequately insured for one of the two time periods listed. Okay. The useful life affordability period of the recipient or that privately owned unit, the term of repayment or forgiveness agreement for all or part of your block grant assistance for privately owned housing units. Housing units assisted with block grants funds must remain affordable for their useful life as determined by the recipient. Affordability period and recipients must have a means of ensuring their investments during this period. Therefore, as long as the useful life or affordability period has not expired, the block grant assistance or assisted housing units owned or operated by the recipient must be covered by adequate insurance. So insurance for housing may either be a purchased insurance policy from an insurance provider or a plan of self-insurance. Recipients may not require insurance on privately owned housing assisted with your block grant funds if there is no risk or loss of exposure to the recipient, or if the assistance is in an amount of less than $5,000. So there's your threshold, okay? If you're putting in more than $5,000, unless repayment of all or a portion of the assistance is part of the assistance agreement. If private homeowners are unable to provide proof of insurance during the useful life or that affordability period of the assisted properties, the recipient must take steps to insure the units in order to be or to protect that block grant investment. This protection can be provided in a number of ways, including purchasing insurance for housing units that are owned, operated, or assisted with block grant funds in an amount that is adequate to provide replacement costs to protect that IHBG investment. Have IHBG assisted private homeowners provide proof of replacement insurance for the useful life, your affordability period of the assistance received. Purchase insurance for privately owned housing units in the amount of the outstanding balance of the block grant assistance provided. Okay. Just remember, if you're going to purchase for privately owned housing, you probably should be purchasing for everyone. Remember, you're supposed to be consistent about how you help your membership. So, the examples. When do housing units not have to be insured? If you, as your housing entity, provide $3,500 in emergency assistance to a private homeowner, the assistance is not subject to a repayment agreement of any kind, then no insurance requirements apply. That's because the threshold's $5,000. When must housing units be insured in accordance with the recipient's useful life or your affordability period policy? If a recipient provides $25,000 in down payment assistance to a private homeowner, that includes a mandatory 10-year useful life, which is the affordability period, for the property and a 5-year repayment clause, then the insurance requirements described above would apply for 10 years from the date the assistance is provided. And you have to track that. That's because it's a 10-year useful life. So what is useful life? Now, I used to start off teaching this class right out of the box. This is useful life because it's referred to throughout the course. And I was teaching up in Northern California, and one of the directors kind of shook her head at me, and I think she thought it was going to confuse the A&O students if I jumped out of the box with useful life. And how does that work with A&O? So now I've got it buried all the way at the end. And I hope it's not too late and it didn't confuse you through the middle. But useful life is another requirement that we have. Before I get there, though, insurance. There's a caveat about our insurance. If you are purchasing a form of insurance, and the requirement is in that guidance, and if you're utilizing one that is owned by the recipient, so if you're utilizing Amerant, which is owned by its members, which are our housing, you don't have to go through the procurement. Okay, you don't have to go find 3 or more, or adequate number of bidders. When you're using insurance and it's Amerant, you can skip those procurement. Sometimes, if you're doing a big thing, that's not what you want to do, but you don't have to if you're utilizing Amerant. Okay, so useful life. This is the example that is used most in Indian country. I believe it comes from the home program. Under 5,000, a 6-month affordability period. 5,001 to 15,000, a 5-year affordability period. 15,001 to 40,000, it's a 10-year affordability period. Over 40,000, 15 years. New construction or acquisition of newly constructed housing, a 20-year period. Okay. Your useful life is in your IHP. That's where you can find out what your tribe is using. It's got to be contained within the IHP. And it's funny because I've went out and done training and talked about useful life, and they didn't know what it was. So I said, can I see your IHP? And there's the chart, not always this one. This is not the one you have to adopt. The secretary has to agree with your useful life, okay, or your entity's useful life. If they approve your IHP, it's considered approved, okay? But this is the one that I've seen the most out there when I look at IHPs. So useful life, there's 2 different program guidances on it, 2020-02, which I know is in your reference materials. 2014-09 might be. I used to include them both because it's got samples in it that aren't in the later one, okay? So program guidance 2020-02 clarifies what's going to be considered satisfactory to the secretary, what constitutes an acceptable binding commitment. 2014-09 provides samples of useful life for housing units assisted with block grant funds and replaces that program guidance, or was replaced by 2020-02. This is what the guidance looks like. It requires housing units must remain affordable, okay, for either the remaining useful life of the property as determined by the secretary, okay, so by them approving your IHP where your useful life is listed, that's how the secretary determines it, okay. Such other period that the secretary determines is the longest feasible period of time. Requires useful life description in the IHP, applies to new and rehab units, okay? Anytime basically you're utilizing something on a home, those NAHASDA funds requires useful life provisions. So somebody within your housing entity has to pay attention and enforce useful life. It does not apply to mutual help units. And this is a iffy point, okay? Mutual help that was pre-NAHASDA, so 1937 Act money, and the units that came with the subsidy does not apply for useful life. Now, if you mimicked the mutual help program, and I know of tribes that did, and even called them mutual help, and they were built with NAHASDA funds, so there's no subsidy attached to them, those would apply to those particular units, okay? So it depends on that funding source. Useful life is the period during which low-income rental units and low-income homebuyer housing has to remain affordable as required by Section 205, A2, and 209 of NAHASDA. So you'd go to the statute to read about this particular part. So affordability period. When block grant or Title VI funds are spent on a property, an investment is made for low-income families. Remember, beginning of the course, Congress gives money for low-income Native Americans. The return on that investment is the period of continued use during which the property will be available for use by low-income families. The future use is that affordability period or useful life for that property. It must be established for housing units that are constructed, acquired, or rehabbed using block grant or Title VI funds to ensure the property is made available only to low-income families for the specified useful life of that property. For minor investments, your affordability period can be a nominal time period, but NAHASDA requires some period be designated and it's secured with a binding commitment. If the period is less than a year, it's not necessary to record the written use restriction for purposes of complying with NAHASDA. But it is a good business practice to record that use restriction for purposes of giving notice to your subsequent purchasers. So the binding agreement satisfactory to HUD is a written use restriction agreement developed by you as the recipient, placed on an assisted property for the period of its useful life. That program guidance 2014-09 provides sample binding agreements. So the decisions you have to make, first of all, you have to decide your period. Okay, it's got to be listed in the IHP. IHP has to be approved. Then you have to decide, are you going to have a single recovery amount or a prorated amount? What does that mean? Well, if it's $10,000 and it's a 10-year period and you're in your 9th year and you have a single recovery amount, well, then you would owe the housing authority back if you sold that house to a non-low income Native person, all $10,000. If it was a prorated amount, it was $10,000 for 10 years, you're in your 9th year, you would owe the housing entity $1,000. Okay, you're going to have a fee and a chart and all of that, built out with them. And they need to know that going in before accepting those funds. So somebody, like I said, has to be taking care of this within your housing entity. So fee land single recovery amount requires the full amount of block grant or Title VI to be refunded or returned to the tribe or TDHE should that property be sold or transferred prior to the end of that useful life and affordability period. If it's prorated, it can be prorated over the life of the restriction. In the event of a default, only the current prorated amount must be refunded. So you need to have a tracking method, okay? And then those need to be recorded. You either record them if you're on fee land with the Bureau of Indian Affairs, or if you're a Hearth Act, you record it within the tribe, or you record them, at the county level. So tracking methods, they're going to look for tracking methods when they come in and do your monitoring. Maintain a spreadsheet, make sure you got the property address, the owner's name, how much block grant was spent, what was the affordability period assigned, what was the date you assisted, and what form of a binding commitment. This is the form that HUD kind of looks at for down payment assistance. Occupant, date of application, proof of enrollment, annual income at the time of application, family size at the time of application, what the income limit is, what's the difference, are they eligible, how many bedrooms, what was the purchase price, is it within the TDC? See, they look at every bit of this when they do monitoring. A verified check issued to the mortgage company, what does that mean? HUD doesn't want you for down payment or they don't want you issuing that check just to the tribal member. You can put the tribal member's name and the mortgage company's on there, but they don't want it just to go to the tribal member. The date of the assistance. Is there lead-based paint there? Do you have a useful life agreement executed? Is there insurance on that home? So they're going to check for all of that. Make sure your ducks are in a row. Use these forms. They are also in your reference materials. If you're in the A&O department, pull down the reference materials for self-monitoring and start doing it yourself. And if you find something that you should have been doing that you didn't do, put a big old red mark right on the front of the folder and write what was wrong. And then when they come in and they do the monitoring, you've discovered it during your self-monitoring, and your executive director writes about it in the next year's APR. We've discovered that we didn't have executed, useful life and binding commitments, or we put somebody in there that was not income eligible. How did you correct it? Well, we took A&O training to make sure that that would not happen, and we started to review a certain amount of our files every year or whatever. And then they can't give you a finding for it because you've already discovered that. That's what self-monitoring is for. Make yourself better, find your own mistakes. So enforceable agreements, participant agreement, liens on property. It's recorded, forgivable loan agreement or a conditional grant. So what happens if you're building a project? You know, um, what kind of things do you have to make sure takes place before you start a project when it comes to A&O? You got to do a needs assessment, or you should do a needs assessment and community planning by getting that buy-in. Identify needs, the programs, the facilities, what portion of land you're going to use. Always get organizational commitment and understanding from your governing body in writing. Why? My tribal council turns over every 2 years. I'm working with somebody whose tribal council turns over every 1 year. Some have 4 years. Some are staggered. Mine are all at once. You want to say, this is the marching orders by resolution. This is why we're doing this. Okay. Makes it a lot easier, more defensible when you have that turnover in leadership. Identify human and financial resources to implement your project. Where's the money going to come from? What types of forms of commitment do I have? Official resolutions and official meeting minutes, okay? You just don't get their buy-in while they're sitting around eating lunch. Analysis can tell you about your people, about your community. What can your community members afford? What are they willing to pay? What household size and composition? Okay, we did a brief analysis. We found out that we were doing a really good job at getting homes and home ownership. We had good rental stock, but there was nothing for our young men. Our young women would get married, and then their families would have households or whatever. But if it was a young single guy, he was living with his parents because there was nothing around here. What did we do? We started building apartments. They have ran at 100% occupancy since we started. We built one. We built two. We built three sets, and then we turned around and started building 1 and 2 bedroom homes, very small ones for those starter families. That's what we were missing. That's what we found out with that analysis. We had a large portion of our tribal membership that was a very young age or going to become adults, very soon in the next couple of years. Your price. So your rental, will your revenues meet your expenses to operate and enable, if you're going to offer a mortgage program, a mortgage? Home ownership, what price and resulting mortgage will people pay? What is your affordability gap? What is the reality gap? Program. What type of housing meets people's wants, home, property, sizes, amenities, and what can people afford and are willing to pay? What type of program can you provide them? Methods of assistance. You're going to give them subsidy for a rental, TBRA, grant, loan, no interest, market interest, reduced interest. What they want to know is when you put together a program, because you have to list it in your IHP, that you're doing all this math, how much it's going to cost your subsidy. Is it a one-time hit to your subsidy, or are you pledging a very large portion or a big portion by giving utility allowances and things like that out for the rest of your life? Are you going to allow sweat equity? Are you going to provide technical assistance? Okay, so we started running all these conventional mortgage programs here. USDA for the lowest of low, the 184 was the middle, and the conventional was the ones with good credit. I soon, when we began that, learned our tribal members don't really know how to be a contractor. So we had to make sure that we had general contractors that could do that on their behalf, because the first 5 or 6, me and my staff were almost acting as a general contractor, and we just couldn't devote that on top of, everything else. You got to have this, and then your utilities in before this, and and all those steps, they didn't have the you know background and knowledge on how to do that properly. So it's really important to make sure that you have contractors around that are willing to do that and walk them all the way through, um, your technical assistance. So your stricter rules. If you're going to use multiple funders, let's say we're going to build an apartment building, let's get some low income housing tax credits. Their rules are different than NAHASDA. We're allowed to require just Native Americans. That's not always the case depending on what type of money or funds you are using. You know, Special needs, credit issues, different documents, different income limits, different income targeting, minimum incomes, affordability periods, asset calculations, all of those in your funders could be different, and you have to be ready to start administering those programs. Okay, what is the maximum rent for a family with zero income? The policy determines a flat rent, zero, no more than 30% of their adjusted income. Come on, guys. Okay, I'm gonna get ready to end it because okay, end the poll. Zero. Actually, that could be minimum rent too with zero income. 30% of zero is zero. What's the maximum rent for a low income family? Alicia Scott, the question regarding rehab, is the housing department responsible for insuring the house after rehab, or is the applicant? The applicant is always the one responsible. You, as housing, are responsible to make sure that they are meeting the insurance requirements. Your chief and your national council, that's leadership. But they should have training on when they should be stepping in and when they should not be. Your eviction notices, and if you're going through your proper legal, duties, they shouldn't be overriding the court system. They need training. There is training for tribal council and board of commissioners that they need to take, and it's free. Just apply for it. Okay. Yes, 30% of adjusted income. Sorry, should have ended it. I was answering the question. Okay. Can a tribe or TDHE charge a home buyer for maintenance? Yes, no, or it depends. Couple more. One more. Come on, guys. Okay. So, yes, you may charge them for maintenance. As a matter of fact, we had a list of charges that we used for our rental and our mutual help. Charged for our maintenance men's time, always send two, broke down to the quarter hour, and a standard charge for the replacement of a door, replacement of a window, replacement of a screen, replacement, and when we would do inspections and we would inspect our home ownership, we would give them a certain amount of time to get it corrected or contact us and use the housing authority, and we would do it and we would bill them. Why? Because if that homeowner breaks his lease, gets kicked out, turns the house back over, and the 19th of their 20th year, you have to bring it right up to new and put that product back out. It's still your housing entity's property until the day it conveys. So you are better off financially keeping those inspected and keeping the maintenance up on them. Okay, so that's the deal on that. When can the tribe or TDHE charge a renter for maintenance? Renters pay all the maintenance, never when the damage is beyond normal wear and tear. No problem, Alicia. Just gotta have a second to read it. Okay, come on. Anybody else gonna end the poll? Why? Because it's Friday and I'm trying to get you guys out of there close. I know I'm gonna run a little over. So when the damage is beyond normal wear and tear. So lease management. Your dwelling lease can be rental, lease to own, home ownership. Always anything with the lease, any change to a lease should be reviewed, by your attorney. It defines that contractual obligation between the residents and the recipients. Inclusions, the important inclusions on that lease, the name of the parties, the unit location, the amount and due date of the monthly payment, the amount of the security deposit, utility services, are they provided? Which ones are? Each party's obligations. We got to make sure that your front walk or you have an entrance for an ambulance if needed. Somebody's got to keep that snow out of the way, housekeeping standards, inspections, termination clauses, clauses on drugs, criminal activity, pets, parking, etc. Some of our sanitation facilities, sewer or whatever, are in the front yard. You can't park a car on top of them. Service animals, hoarding, those are all different things. Additional inclusions: residents' right to use and occupancy, notice procedures, recertification, changes in house payments, household composition, tenant responsibilities for utilities, solid waste, abandoned vehicles, court jurisdiction, receipt of policies, tenant caused damages, charges, corrective actions, entry of dwelling unit during the tenancy, grievance procedures, evictions, inoperable vehicles, resident maintenance responsibilities, appliance uses intended, not using your kitchen stove to heat the house, possible lease addenda, things that could change periodically, the list of occupants, requirements to maintain that essential family status, notice of payment and collection procedures, rules of occupancy. There are prohibited lease provisions, confessions of judgments requiring that, seizure of personal property for rent, exculpatory charges, waiver of legal notice. You can't put any of that in the lease. Waiver of legal proceedings or jury trial, waiver to right of appeal, requirement to pay cost of legal actions regardless of outcome. Okay, that's an area where you see slippage. You can't be charging your tenants for court charges unless they lose the case. Home ownership agreement allows the homeowner or home buyer to purchase the unit or lease unit with option to purchase, specifies the resident's obligations, pay for required maintenance and utilities, ability to contribute land, materials, cash, labor, the capacity to pay monthly homebuyer payments. Your policies may require mandatory housing, counseling, to help your resident understand their financial and their social responsibilities of homeownership. Your orientation and your lease topics with your rental units, regardless of program type, you should be doing an orientation for any applicant family, along with that thorough review of whatever lease agreement is in place. That's when you sit them down. Remember, I said you do this, and don't wait until you're handing them the key, or they'll be thinking about what they need to buy. Do this a couple of weeks ahead of time. Don't give them the key, just go through your lease stuff. Many recipients now include basic housekeeping as part of that orientation. It helps the participants understand the standards used for your inspection and how to meet those standards. Some recipients include basic cleaning supplies necessary as part of a welcome basket for their new participants. In addition to housekeeping standards, all participants should know when to call your maintenance staff and the basics, how to shut off the water to their unit. Your basic orientation steps are proven to save time and money in future maintenance charges. Now, we wouldn't usually show them the water shutoffs and things like that at that very beginning. Maybe during the walkthrough, the move-in walkthrough, but definitely during their first inspection. And you know what? The 10, 11, 12-year-old that's in the house, have them go too. It's amazing how sharp those kids are and how long they remember things. You're going to talk about using your unit as a primary private residence. You can't lease it out, things like that. Making the monthly payments when they're due, keeping the unit in a good, safe condition. We didn't allow blankets on our windows. Our screens, we would see a screen was out and we would call them, this is how much it costs to repair it. You charge them 2-3 times, mom's going to start paying a little bit more attention to her children and the condition of that unit. So all the screens were on the units. Cooperating with the recertification and inspection procedures, you tell them, you can cancel us once, but that's it. We will try to schedule around you. Understanding the maintenance process, understanding how disputes and grievances will be handled. Reviewing insurance coverage, telling them, hey, for a rental, we're insuring the unit itself, but the contents you need to insure that for you. Responsibility, that guest behavior. When to request maintenance. Okay. You got a running toilet and it's been running all week long. Don't wait until 3:45 or 4 o'clock on Friday of a holiday weekend and call my guys and tell them it's running. If it's something you've known about, at least give them the decency to try to do that during the week. They want to be with their families. I always did that. I loved my maintenance guys. Those were my boys. That's, you took care of them. They take care of all your tenants. They go out in the middle of the night. But that was one thing I would try to please, have some consideration. Now, if it's a big problem, by all means, call us right away. But otherwise, try to do it in a timely manner. Okay. How often should your lease be updated? Never changes, whenever something changes at recertification. Alicia, your rehab still should, depending on the amount of money, have a useful life and binding agreement on there. And that's how long, look at the insurance requirements and look at what you're doing with your useful life in that period of time. I really can't speak to it without looking at it, but make sure you're paying attention to useful life and the insurance requirements. If not, show your ED and see what they say, unless you are the ED. Okay, whenever I'm going to end it, something in that lease changes, okay? Are tenants or home buyers required to have counseling prior to move-in? Yes, no, depends on your policy. Okay. I'm going to end this. This depends on your policy and the amount of staff that you have. Okay. Lease compliance basics, maintenance, recertifications, inspections, maintenance requirements. 3 important documents that influence your maintenance policy are NAHASDA statute requiring it, the regulations at 24-1000, which also require it, and your dwelling lease. Your responsibilities vary by program. Rental, it's your tribe, your tribal entity, your housing entity. Homeownership, the maintenance responsibilities fall on the tenants or the homeowners. But you as a housing entity, that's legally your property, so you too are responsible to make sure that they're complying with that. Policies can require a rental tenant to pay for work to repair damages beyond wear and tear. May be good to include maintenance issues in your lease agreement. This is a sample failure to perform maintenance clause included in a home ownership occupancy agreement. Failure to perform maintenance, failure of the participant to perform his maintenance obligations or their maintenance constitutes a breach of this policy and is grounds for termination of program assistance. Upon a determination by housing staff that a breach has occurred, the staff shall require the participant to agree to a specific plan of action to cure the breach and assure future compliance. The plan shall provide for maintenance work to be done within a reasonable time by housing staff in a good workmanlike manner in accordance with the UBC. If the tenant fails to carry out the plan, the tribe or the THE will have the work completed and charge the cost to the participant. Such charges will be billed to the participant. So your maintenance policy topics, some of them: emergency, urgent, routine, and non-routine services. So you know the difference, okay? It should be spelled out in your maintenance policy. Your vacated unit repair, your preventative maintenance, your inspections, the right of access, the work order process, the standards of work, the schedule of cost, and your maintenance counseling. All starts and begins with a work order, okay? Your maintenance work order system provides the ability to control work, to schedule it, to track work planned and completed, facilitate development of a preventative maintenance plan and a capital improvement plan, to allow job costing, and comply with your total development cost. Your move-in inspections of your home's conditions. You have your family sign that inspection report before you hand over the keys. Use those phones that you give your maintenance workers. Whenever you see damage, whenever you're documenting anything, even the time that you're doing your work order, you have one of your guys take a picture of another one of your staff. It's got the time and the date right on there. To have them take a picture of them with their hand in the air and a picture of that. It shows you when, the date and time you were doing something. And then, if you have download it, upload it, whatever to your files. So your move outs. Now this is mine, okay? This is what I got tired after a while of saying, why didn't I get my whole security deposit back? And it's like, was your house in the same condition that you received it? And they kind of would, tilt their head or whatever. So this is what I used to send them. You don't need to do this, but I would. It should require a 30-day written notice. You're moving out. We need to have notice. Give us 30-day notice. We need to conduct an inspection. Those units, when you return them, should be close to original condition. Okay? They're going to pay, or you need to pay, for damages, not wear and tear. Okay, there's a difference there. This is what We were happy to have you as a tenant. We're sad to see you go. An effort to make your move out process go smoothly and to maximize the amount of your security deposit returned to you, please follow these guidelines. We're going to try to process your deposit within 60 days within the receipt of your keys. If you don't provide us with the forwarding address when you return your keys, your security deposit, if eligible for a refund, will be sent to your last known address. Should you have a debt with the housing authority or damages and cost in excess of your security deposit, your final billing will also be mailed to your last known address. You and your household members will not be eligible to apply for any housing services or programs offered by the housing entity until your debt is paid in full. Unit charges. We're going to continue to charge your rent and mortgage for 90 days or until you come to the housing office and return all of the keys. Abandoned property. All abandoned property left in the residence, inside and out, after keys have been returned to the office, will be disposed of, and you will be charged accordingly for their removal and its disposal. Then there's a move out procedure. Please consider this official notification. Your current lease with us will expire on this day. Unless we have yet to receive the keys to your unit, your lease has not been renewed and will terminate on the noted expiration date. Enclosed, please find our move out procedures that should be used to help assist you identify our requirements for cleaning and move out of your unit. When you assumed occupancy of your current residence, you found it in a clean and ready to move into condition, unless otherwise noted in your move-in inspection report. Due to the very short time period between your move-out date and the new resident's move-in date, it's imperative that your residence be left in a very clean, almost move-in condition. Any damages needing repair or routine maintenance should be reported to the housing entity prior to you vacating the residence. An inspection of the premises will be conducted only after you have returned all the unit keys. We encourage you to be present for your move-out inspection, and you must schedule an appointment directly with the housing authority no later than 2 weeks prior to your lease expiration. Please make sure you follow all instructions listed below, about the turning off of the utilities, the natural gas, the abandoned property. We do realize that all items might not be present in your unit, but then it tells them, your refrigerator emptied of all food, freezer defrosted, unit cleaned inside and out, cabinets, drawers emptied, shelves wiped down, remove all shelves, paper, grease, crumbs, blah, blah. And it gives them a walkthrough of their unit, their bathroom, and their cleaning. Okay. When you contacted these certain utilities, and then again, your exterior and all of that, keys and locks. It helped with, they're like, wow, I didn't know I had to do this. Well, that's how you got your unit. This is what I'm going to base this security deposit on. So it did help a lot once we started giving them that. And the houses started coming back in a much better condition. And they knew if they didn't clean them, that we were going to charge them. So inspections, your requirements for your inspections, that initial inspection to ensure work is performed or the condition of the unit meets your performance standards. Reoccurring inspections, all units assisted with NAHASDA, owned by your tribe or housing entity for which they have maintenance responsibility. All units covered by lease purchase agreements, all 37 Housing Act rental and home ownership. Recertification scheduling can be done on their lease execution anniversary or spread out to manage your workload, or you can do it project by project. The only thing that we always try to do is we would try to do that once all the snow was gone from the ground so we could do the outside inspections also. Should begin 90 days in advance. Give them proper notice so they can clean their units also. Use third-party verification when possible. Give at least 30 days notice to or for a rent increase. So my tribe supplies free dumpsters, okay, twice a year, spring and fall. We would always send out the notice of inspection when they would get ready to put the dumpsters in place. It gives them motive, and the dumpster's cup full, always full, always full. It's a huge program, and it's, very helpful to keep your trash down also. Interim recertification examples, job loss, retirement, change in family composition, death, birth, resident moves out, changes income, pay raises, unemployment resident becomes employed, substantial increase in allowances, childcare, travel expenses, resident turns 62. Those are also some of the things we would discuss during their pre-move-in. So we would tell them, we need to know when any of these events happen, because it could affect your rent, so corrective action for non-compliance. Legal action should be preceded by phone communication first, okay? Home visits, first correction plan, second, third, informing them that you're going to refer them for legal action. Written documentation, always write down all your your contact. Keep copies of your letters. You need them for court, okay? They're hugely important. Troubleshooting tools, there's something called Pathways Home, a native guide to home ownership. It's wonderful. There's credit rebuilding letters, budgeting workshops, power pay debt reduction at powerpay.org. Okay. Are recertifications required for home buyers? Yes, no, depends on your policies. Okay, guys, I'm gonna end this poll because we're running late. Surprise, surprise, surprise. In the word of Gomer Pyle, it depends on your policy. Really good idea to do, because you have to prove that you're not charging them over 30% of their income. So you need to do them occasionally. Also, a very good time for lease discussions and a review of the occupants in the home in case they move people in. We control who goes even to our home ownership units because of the criminal backgrounds. So our policies required them to be recertified. Our inspections required for home ownership. Alista? Yes, no, depends on your policy. Okay. It's yes. I'm just going to go. Which of the reasons is not to track a maintenance work order? Scheduling work appropriately, track cost for the APR, track cost for your total development cost. None are reasons to track maintenance work orders. All are reasons to track work orders. And I'm going to end this poll. Everybody that answered was right. Okay, I'm doing this because of time. So counseling, we're almost done. Applicable rules, define your housing counseling, define one-on-one, types of one-on-one counseling, discuss focus of housing counseling, and identify the implementation steps for providing housing counseling. So what is it? It's the process of sharing information between a client, housing counselor, to help alleviate some of the client's problems as far as housing. It's personal, it's specific, it's usually one-on-one. It's a way to help your people help themselves. It can become a relationship. It's problem solving in a professional manner. Some of the housing counseling topics: budgeting. I used to bring them in and show them my own budgets. This is how I do it. I can't afford to go to the coffee shop and buy $7-8 coffee every day. Why? This is how much money it costs me in a month to do that. Why? The only time that I ever go in a casino, are you there? You tell me that you can't pay your bills, but you can go out and you're not working in the casino. Sometimes you have to have discussions like that, but teaching them, these are all your bills, bring them all in. Debt management, credit repair, self-sufficiency, maintenance counseling, financial literacy, relocation assistance, rental assistance, early intervention before a delinquency, homebuyer education, pre-purchase, post-purchase. It can include housekeeping, fire safety, how to use a grievance policy, advocacy, mortgage delinquency. Those goals are to foster developments of life skills, household budgeting, financial management, home maintenance, provide case management approach through the comprehensive community, a resource network, and increase homeownership opportunities. Different types, client intake meetings, group instructions, one-on-one counseling. And to deliver that housing counseling service, your programs can combine group sessions with one-on-one to give attendees a chance to discuss matters which they might not want to discuss in a group setting. They should be offered at convenient times and locations. You can't hold all your trainings or counseling sessions during a business day. You just can't do it. They have to work too. So you do stuff on the weekend. You do stuff time, after 7 o'clock at night. Tell them they can bring their kids and offer babysitting or games or, however you can get them in there. And then you give your staff flex time or whatever. Delivering housing services, client intake meetings. Those initial meetings affords a staff time to meet your families, provide an introduction to your services that you offer, explains the family application process, consent to release information forms, scheduling future appointments to review credit and debt, registering for classes, that can be done during that meeting. Group instruction, orientation program that informs families about the steps they need to take to prepare themselves for financial obligations and responsibilities of renting or home ownership. Presented in a group setting, facilitated by housing staff. That orientation can actually be fun and informative. One-on-one counseling. Housing counseling services are most effective when 90% of the counseling effort is delivered as one-on-one counseling. Many families experience financial hardship for a variety of reasons. There's a lot of times the spouse doesn't know. They think, they're putting away money and they think their spouse is making the payment. Sometimes you need to get a hold of the spouse. I would have in those, apartment buildings, a lot of dads would bring their daughters in, and I would say, is it all right if I contact your dad if I ever need to get a hold of you or you're late on your rent or anything like that? And dad's sitting there and they'll usually nod and say, yeah, okay, can you sign this form? And then when they're late on their rent and I try to contact them or, the staff does and can't get a hold of them, we call dad. Lots of times, majority of the time, dad's going to make that payment. Is that awful? Well, hey, I'm collecting that money. The child is still housed, so there's more than one way around that. Some duties expected of occupancy staff include the ability to assess the family financial needs and work one-on-one with that family to develop an action plan to meet those housing goals. Different types: pre-occupancy, pre-purchase, credit counseling, budget counseling, post-purchase, default counseling, and advocacy. That one-on-one focuses on affordability, debt, credit, down payment assistance, recognizing predatory lending. We had somebody that we found out, wow, a whole bunch of these tenants had new cars. It was like 19% they were charging. We brought it to the tribal council and they went and actually threatened to sue the dealership, taking advantage, predatory lending over our tribal members. So recognizing those predatory lending practices, and helping them and telling them, this is how much you're going to end up paying at this rate. Understanding fair lending, avoiding foreclosure, resolving a financial crisis. It involves short and long-term goals, budgeting to achieve those goals, and thoroughly explaining your budget creation process. Maybe sitting down with them Okay, next week, I want you to bring every bill that you think you pay, Challenges to making payments, too much debt, lack of stable employment, especially our fishermen. They could get blown out of the water, lose all their nets, because of the wind. Lack of savings, lack of resources to handle emergencies. I've shared this before. I have 2 children, many years apart, but the older one, if she gets 8,000 back from the Internal Revenue Service, her return, she will spend all but $100 of it. Now the younger one, I was older when I raised him. He puts away money constantly aware, that he's going to need this money in the future. Difference in how they're taught. So, lack of resources to handle emergencies. I'm the resource with the one. So, counseling barriers, slow payment, credit issues, insufficient income, high debt, slow payment, low savings, employment stability, and trust property. I could not at first, when I first started at the housing entity, they would give me $40,000-$50,000 all day long for a car. You'd think I could get $4,000 or $5,000 for a mobile home on the reservation? Oh no, they couldn't repo it. So there was nothing like that. That's changed a lot here. I'm proud to say that we can, get houses and things here, but before we could not. That trust property was really hard to deal with in the past. Still is in some places. So common challenges, hardships with meeting your housing obligations. They can occur for a lot of reasons: too much debt, lack of stable employment. Many families fail to make those house payments in a timely manner because they lack the resources to save money and handle emergencies. Debt management, budgeting, credit repair services, they're critical in meeting our housing obligations, achieving housing goals. And in some cases, you sometimes need a mediator to resolve, neighbor on neighbor. It gets interesting after a while here in places. So informing tenants of a simple home maintenance procedure is another challenge because, there are those that have never cleaned, those that never turned off the water, reset a breaker box, turned on a gas furnace or a stove. I made the mistake of buying a project 15, I think it was a 15 unit project. And for some reason, the other ovens that I put in there, if the power went out, and that happens a lot, or they blinks in the winter here, the stove wouldn't work. You had to reset the clock on there. So the staff up front, the ones answering the phones, became pretty good at saying, hey, is your stove clock blinking? Okay, that's why your oven's not working. They could handle all of those little things just over the phone. Finally, that housekeeping and cleaning routines are new to some of them. So in those baskets, put in a plunger. If you don't give them a basket, put a brand new plunger with a bow around it to your new tenant. It'll, save a whole bunch of maintenance, especially for apartments, maintenance calls, because they don't own plungers if it's their first place. Okay, this exercise, what should be covered in housing counseling? I'm just going to go through it. You don't need to answer. Terms and conditions of the dwelling lease, policies covered in admissions and continued occupancy, collections are all could be covered. All could be covered. At least I'm going through them quick is what I'm doing. So collections, inform your residents of guidelines for rent collections, house payments, housing services, and payment of, your work orders and other changes. Ensure a continuation of adequate housing services when providing for safety and well-being of your residents. It's to promote fairness and due process. And that policy should apply to your residents who have entered into a lease or home ownership also with the recipient. That's the purpose of that collection policy. Required monthly payment should be on your lease. Your collection policy should include, that definition of what a delinquent account is, the process for extensions and partial payments due to hardships, your process for budget counseling sessions, notice of delinquencies. They're going to be delinquent on what? The 16th day of the month. Payback agreements, notices of termination. We didn't charge very much, $15, but we had a $15 late fee. Why? Because, hey, sometimes that would give them the incentive to get in there on time. The explanation of a permanent loss of eligibility for future services. The processes for a grievance or an administrative hearing. That collecting, it's critical. NAHASDA allows tribes or housing entities to tailor monthly amounts to community needs for affordability. They should be affordable to begin with. I had an argument with one of my staff members one time, and I said, you go out and find a brand new 3-bedroom with an attached garage anywhere, probably not double the impact of what our highest payment is here, and tell me they're not getting a good deal. They need to be able to pay the rent. And she went out and she looked counties wide, couldn't do it. I mean, there's no way, legal and other collection costs take away from other affordable housing activities. Failure to collect those payments hurts their future housing assistance and the housing assistance of other people. You're not only being served by the program, but then you're not paying the program. So you're really stopping, your children from being served in the future. Everyone has a role in collections and compliance. Everything they do can have an impact on your program's success and make all of the efforts for collection and compliance positive and constructive. There are places you put it in the IHP, you have the discussions with your leadership that I have seen. You make all your payments on time, January through November. In December, we will waive your rent and you'll have Christmas money, more Christmas money. It's a good incentive. You figure out how much it would cost, figuring how many people will do it. You can do things like that, Case management. Collections and compliance is more effective on a case-by-case basis. A model for case management and that willing and ability to pay. Some of these requirements could be included in your collection procedure and policy. The amount of the required monthly payment will be stipulated in the lease or the home ownership agreement. If the resident fails to meet his or her financial obligation, including payment of the required rent, the account should be handled as a delinquent account. The ability to meet financial obligations is a requirement for initial admission and continued occupancy of that dwelling unit. If the resident presents evidence of inability to make full payment due to hardship, the policy can allow for the consideration of an extension and the negotiation of a settlement. The resident should make contact with the staff prior to the due date to receive an extension. The extension deadline will become the new due date. Extreme circumstances may be considered in approving an extension of the due date. So these are your payback agreements. You should also list how many times are allowed to have a payback agreement during, a year's time or 2 years' time. Okay. Such conditions could include death of an immediate family member, other disaster, there's somebody in the family's, in the hospital somewhere, or other disaster that affects the financial state of the family. When the resident presents credible evidence that clearly shows an inability to make full payment, a partial payment can be accepted. Notice of delinquency will be sent to a resident who has not made his or her full monthly payment by the time specified. The notice of delinquency is a written demand for immediate payment of the past due balance. The notice shall inform the delinquent resident to make an immediate payment for continued occupancy of the housing unit. Upon service of the notice of delinquency, the resident has a specified amount of time to remit the delinquent amount in full or commit to that payback agreement. The notice also may recommend that the delinquent resident immediately contact the housing staff regarding any financial problems or unusual circumstances. The notice should inform the resident that failure to comply with the notice will result in a notice of termination. Budget counseling may be scheduled with the resident during the period of account delinquency. While your policy should require a minimum of one budget counseling session prior to the termination of the lease or homebuyer agreement of the lease or homebuyer agreement, a series of follow-up counseling sessions is recommended. A housing counselor is responsible for providing family budgeting, maintenance counseling. They can also sometimes have that discretion to negotiate payment agreements with delinquent residents before that notice of termination is served. That payback agreement can be negotiated with the delinquent resident as an alternative to immediate termination, although your policy can limit the number of times a resident may enter into a payback agreement within a specified period. Failure to make the required monthly payment and or breach of subsequent payback agreements and termination of the resident lease or home ownership agreement may result in a permanent loss of eligibility for future services or benefits offered by the tribal housing program. If the resident does not comply with the notice of delinquency or the resident otherwise breaches the lease, the resident may be served with a written notice of termination by certified mail, return receipt requested. The notice states the reason for termination. The resident may respond to the notice or may cure the violation or bring the delinquent amount current. Your resident has a right to request a hearing in accordance with the grievance procedure if there is a discrepancy with any of the notices. Otherwise, the recipient may begin an administrative hearing process. At the administrative hearing, if the resident is delinquent and not violated any other provisions, a staff can actually negotiate a payback agreement with the home buyer or renter in which the resident will be required to pay an additional amount on top of their required monthly payment to pay off the past due balance. If your resident defaults on the payback agreement, the recipient may commence eviction proceedings. For your collection tips, establish the ability and willingness to evict. Okay, what does that mean? If you never evict anybody, it's going to get around the community and they're going to say, well, we don't have to pay our rent, any rent, because they won't kick us out. They hear somebody gets evicted, it makes them a little bit more, if you do that and you follow all the policies the same way, you're going to have a lot more people that pay on time. Match your policies with your practices. Follow up. Use receipts. Remember to say thank you. Recognize a participant of the month if you want. Emphasize positive payment histories. Aggressively offer job placement if you can. Remember, help those tenants as much as you can. Promote that self-sufficiency if you can. Address your toughest cases in your monthly meetings. Revisit incentives for prompt payment. Communicate with both spouses in the family, other family members if appropriate. Develop skills in using your appropriate court systems. That is a tribal housing authority collection process. You should have it all outlaid. Your corrective actions in all instances where there appears to be a failure to perform legal actions, it should be preceded by taking, the following actions. Initiate that communication by phone, make a home visit, write the first letter explaining to the family your efforts to contact them, nature of the issue, process to resolve the issue, time frame by which the housing staff needs to be notified. That second letter, efforts to contact the family, nature again, process to resolve it, time frame by which the staff has to be notified. In the third letter, you write and you inform the family that the situation is being referred for legal action. When dealing with maintenance, research, collections, documentation is critical if legal action is going to be pursued. Letters describing noncompliance are the corresponding corrective action details have to be supported with written documentation. Phone contact prior to submitting a corrective action plan facilitates the opportunity to prepare the family prior to receiving those notices. But you still need to document them and put them in your file. I contacted this person on this day. We had discussions, regarding the following. Eviction provides the remedy of last resort. Your tribe or your housing entity can file civil action against residents in appropriate legal jurisdictions premised on breach of agreement arising from non-payment or other just cause. When should you evict a participant for non-payment? You can put this one up, my girl. Within 30 days of their missed payment, never, because they're your tribal members, or as a last resort. Jay, that comes around for the people that were active within a mutual help program. Okay. That was adjustable there. And we still have people within mutual help under 37 Housing Act. And depending on, some people still offer that program. Okay, guys, I'm going to finish this off. It is as a last resort. And that's the end of the thing. Thank you for sticking with me. 20 minutes over today. I apologize. That's the end of it, though. A whole lot of information, and I hope you guys learned something and enjoyed it.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. It has been an incredible week. Thank you so much. It was a lot of loaded information, and everyone, if you missed any of the days, you can find any of the recorded webinars in the web links, and I will talk about them in a second. Just make sure we get Cheryl's card out there. Just in case if anybody wants her information, here is her number and email. Please feel free to send any questions to Cheryl. She'll be more than happy to help you to her best ability. And if not, then she'll send you to the right person who can. I already launched the survey for the feedback today. Please let us know what you thought. The information is greatly appreciated, and it is anonymous. Our next webinar is going to be What's the Wi-Fi Code? An update on internet accessibility in Indian country. As always, registration is free. It'll be at 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Central, 12 p.m. Mountain, 11 a.m. Pacific, and 10 a.m. Alaska time. You can access this webinar recording and any of our other webinar recordings on our website at www.nativelearningcenter.com under the Recorded Cathedra webinar tab. That is where you can find all of our webinar recordings for up to 2 years. Don't forget to check up our upcoming events on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. We also have a podcast called Hope a Thing, a Native American Podcast, and you can find that on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcast, and Simplecast. Once
Jeannie,
again, thank
can
you,
you
everyone.
put your request in? I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Cheryl.
Jeannie had a request about day 3. If you would I don't have access to that, she can get it for you. Just put it in the type thing here for her. I'm sorry. There you go.
No, you're okay. It was the day 3 recording.
Yeah.
There you go. It's in the link. I'll go ahead and just list all of them in there, just in
Thank
case.
you, guys.
If anybody needs help finding the webinar recordings, please feel free to email us. We'd be more than happy to send them to you. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. And thank you for joining today.
Thank you, my girl. You've been a wonderful background